Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from, of course, Command Central at the Philanthropy Mastermind series. So happy that you can hang out with us, especially since many of us are planning to get on a plane sometime soon. If you're not, in fact, living in the environs of Toronto, a great place to be and a great place to visit. So I hope that if you're planning to be up at ICON, one thing you'll do is visit with me and my colleagues over at DonorSearch, who are kind enough to sponsor this series since 2016. If you just maybe hop by the booth and thank them for this, I'd appreciate that. Maybe tell them what you think of it. That'd be great too. And you can learn more about DonorSearch, which we won't be talking about today unless our guest mentions them, over at donorsearch.net. And there's also an entire calendar of all of the work that we're doing there, including a session next week immediately after the conference on Tuesday, and then again on Thursday with a wrap up with several people who are at the conference. So if you're missing what's happening in Toronto, it doesn't mean you're going to miss all of it. You can come back and join us next Thursday. We'll have a great conversation with you about that and some of the learnings and takeaways and the fun stuff that we were able to enjoy. There are going to be about 3,000, 3,500 people there. That sounds like a lot, but it's probably just about 10% of the membership of AFP and only a small fraction of the number of people who work in the sector. So thanks for taking some time to hang out with us today, even if you can't be in Toronto. But that all said, our guest today, of course, is Cindy Wagman, who not only is, of course, a resident of that incredible area, but also has a lot to say to us about many things, but especially today's topic, which is about, of course, fractional executives. And I'm going to let her introduce that concept. But what I want to say about it before we begin is this. I think we've all been in environments where we needed additional help, especially at the executive level, and we didn't know where to turn. And we were tired of waiting for 6 months or a year or more to find the right person, if we were lucky enough to hire them by then. So there are solutions to this problem. And Cindy has found a good many of them. So Cindy, thank you for hanging out today and talking with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, and I'm so excited to see you in person at ICON. It's always fun. So likewise, we have a booth if anyone is hanging out there in person. I think it's 1311, and we're giving out mini cupcakes. So
Oh,
that's a hot,
well,
yeah.
I'm going to be at your booth more than
Yeah,
likely the DonorSearch booth then, having
yeah.
cupcakes.
Yeah. So, and actually, I'll tell you a little bit about the cupcakes and why we chose the cupcakes because it relates to fractional executives. So my work doing fractional fundraising and now helping fundraisers become fractional fundraisers stemmed from my experience in small organizations, both when I was in-house and as a consultant, where I would see small organizations they would need a fundraiser, but this is for any kind of function, fundraising, HR, finance, you'd need someone to be doing the work, but you don't have a big budget. And so organizations would hire someone without that much experience. And that person, and that was me, my first job out of university as a fundraiser, we're keen, well, hopefully, and doing all the things, but we lack that experience to provide the strategic oversight of the function. And what happens is that usually actually adds more stress and worry to the executive director and board, which is the exact opposite of what a staff person is supposed to do for an organization. And over the years, and as I started my consulting business, it became clear that small organizations really need both the strategic oversight, but also hands-on support. So traditional consulting, the kind that I always associated with when I was in-house and they'd bring in a consultant to give us some fancy advice, which was pretty much the same thing I'd been saying for many years. That advice is not enough for small organizations. You need the strategy and that combined with day-to-day implementation. And that's what a fractional executive is. And so for organizations, I kind of call it you can have your cake and eat it too, right? You can, with a small budget, you can find someone to come in and fill both of those functions, high level C-suite type experience and strategy with some of the day-to-day implementation of a staff member. And so for them, they get to have their cake and eat it too, which is part of the theme for our booth. But the other thing that I do is I actually help experienced fundraisers become fractional fundraisers. And what that means is I help them set up their business and consult as a fractional fundraiser. And they also get to have their cake and eat it too, because they get to usually make more money, work less, and have a lot more control over their careers. So that is the theme. You can have your cake and eat it too. And it's a new way to look at some very old problems that our sector struggles with.
Before we jump into this conversation, I want to point out that, of course, we have the chat and the Q&A here, and we'd love to hear whatever you have to say about anything, whether they're questions or comments. But I know that you can post, especially in the Q&A, you can post anonymously. So if you're a person who is thinking about this issue, either from an internal perspective and perhaps welcoming in a fractional executive to help you out, or whether you're thinking about applying your skills as a fractional executive, but you don't necessarily want to shout that to the world, we'll do two things. First of all, if you want to post anonymously, then it'll be anonymous. But secondly, I won't read names out of the chat. So feel free to just view this as a safe space to talk about something which we should all feel comfortable talking about anyway, because this is really a matter of people being able to do their best work wherever they choose to do it and support the missions they want to support. So you've been through this before, as you said, bringing in these consultants and doing some of these things. When did that start for you? Because you've been in a bunch of places, and it was always, as you said, from the get-go as a manager of fundraising or director of development.
I have always been a fundraiser. So I decided in, I think the summer between second and third year university in my undergrad, I decided I wanted to be a fundraiser, which I know is very unusual. Most people fall into it. They don't make that decision. I actually, in my fourth year, wrote a thesis on feminist fundraising, and this was 21 years ago. So I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I did. I worked in-house in small organizations and kind of like worked my way up the nonprofit ladder. Ended up as the director of development at the business school at the University of Toronto. So really big institution fundraising, very corporate feeling. And I actually fell into consulting. I don't want to say unintentionally, but way sooner than I thought I would. My mentor, her name is Lori Wilcox. She's amazing. She approached me about an organization that was looking for someone to run their capital campaign. And I wasn't really looking to leave my job. I was on mat leave, actually. I had a 4-month-old at home and a almost 3-year-old at home. And in Canada, we have like year-long mat leave. So I was off from work, we had coffee, and she said, would you be interested in running this campaign? And so much about the campaign and the organization appealed to me, but they couldn't pay me what I was making at the business school. It wasn't as secure, like there were lots of other things, and it didn't have the sort of upward trajectory that I saw myself taking at my other job. And with Lori's support, she helped me negotiate to do that campaign, not as a staff person, but as a consultant. And it allowed, for the first time like ever in my career, I was like, wait, I can ask for all these things. So I put it out there. I said, I want to work 3 days a week at this price, and I'm going to work mostly remote and come in and go as I please. I will be a consultant and I'll run this campaign for you. And they said yes. So that's how I started consulting. And I didn't call it fractional at the time, but essentially that's what I was doing. I was doing all the day-to-day pieces of the campaign, plus the high-level strategy and, management of it. And as I did that, over the next couple of years, when I was like, okay, well, now I have a consulting business, I need to grow this to make sure that I have work when this client is done. I started working with small organizations. I knew I wanted to work with small organizations. That was my one North Star. And I did all the things I thought consultants did. do or did. I did fundraising plans. I helped hire staff. I did coaching. So, I'd meet with executive directors every other week. And for an hour, I'd give them like the best advice and they wouldn't do anything. And that fundraising plan sat on someone's desk or realistically their computer. And I got really demoralized. I thought like, this isn't really what I thought I would be doing. It doesn't feel impactful. And so then I said, well, what do they need? What would be impactful for these small organizations? And that was when I was like, they need more hands. And we can talk a lot about, teach them to fish, so to speak, right? Like a lot of consultants will say things like, well, I don't want to get too hands-on because I want to equip the organization with the skills to be able to manage it on their own. That's like phase 2. For some organizations that are just barely keeping their heads above water, they really just need some work taken off their plates. And I was like, that's what we can do. We can take the work off their plates and we're going to do it way better than they would be able to afford otherwise with their budget. And so I created a small agency called The Good Partnership. And that's what we did. I brought in a team of staff and we managed the fundraising programs for small organizations. And it was great. And that's kind of how we got into this. And then the pandemic hit and there's huge demand for this kind of work. And also I, with 2 school-age kids, was feeling pretty burnt out. And so we moved away from the agency model to more of it's not legally a franchise, but I think of it as a franchise where now instead of me hiring people, I train them in this business model. And they make like twice as much as what I would pay them if I hired them. So it's better for them too.
Yeah, they get to be their own business owner, which that sounds like it goes all the way back to your thesis. I mean, because if you're working with small organizations, I don't know how many are women owned or women run in the case of nonprofits, but it's very interesting because our field is so feminized, just meaning in terms of the population demographically speaking, there's so many women. And that sounds great until we look at the pay scales. And I don't know what it's like in Canada where you have a year mat leave. So for the Americans in our audience, for the US people, it's how many people have a 1-year maternity leave. I'm not even sure we use the phrase mat leave most of the time because people don't even know what that means here. But it sounds very progressive in comparison to much of what you have south of the border. But
it hurts your career for sure. Well,
sure. Yeah. But it does sound like there's a matter of agency in all these things, like the decision you made about what you were studying, what you were doing by saying, I don't just want to be a consultant, I want to be, a business owner. And then finally, I don't just want to run an agency where I'm telling people what to do, but I'm going to give them the tools to run their own businesses. That sounds very much like it's all of a theme. Was that intentional or was that organic?
I would say organic. I mean, I always make decisions. Like I have again, you can call it North Stars or what have you, like principles by which I make decisions. Yeah. And even when I did have a team in-house, I really tried to be a very ethical business owner. We were a certified B Corp. I want people to be treated well regardless, especially coming in, like working within the nonprofit sector where we don't treat people that well. I just wanted to do it differently. And so I did, but once I figured this out, and it did come, I would say most of my ideas come from just listening and being curious and seeing what's working and what people need. But once I figured it out, like it's super cool. I mean, all but one of the fractional fundraisers in my network are women. I would say at least half of them are parents, many with young school-age kids, and they have the flexibility to pick their kids up from school when they want or take a sick day when they need, but also they're making more money. And I'm very transparent about all of this, whether or not you're in our network. I can tell you, and if you're a small organization looking to hire a fractional fundraiser, you want to know the money too, right? You want to be able to budget and prepare. So I always say like $4,000 to $5,000 a month is typically what one of our fractional fundraisers would charge an organization, which is kind of on par with what you use to hire a junior person in-house. And each fractional fundraiser works with about, if you want to be working full time, it's about 3 clients. So if you do the math really quickly, it's about $144,000 a year.
Right.
That's nothing to sneeze at, right? Like that's pretty significant for a lot of people in our sector.
Yeah, and it's something like an accordion. I guess you can take on as many or as few assignments as your time allows and as you wish.
Exactly.
So that's a very different sort of thing. You're determining who you want to work for, not who is willing to hire you. And that's a
Exactly.
very different feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's I have to ask you if the experience is different from being a consultant, in the sense that when we go in and we do an engagement, like you said, we write a report and it sits on the shelf and nothing happens. Part of that is that people don't have the additional hands. Many hands make light work. That's true. But there's also an element, at least it feels like there's an element of, well, the person gave me this advice, but I don't actually need to follow it because I have to do all these other things. It's as if the person's a staff person, there's some degree of accountability that you don't have to a person who doesn't work there. So have you seen a difference in when you're there as a fractional, or when your colleagues are there as fractionals, in the way people interact with their ideas and the way that they treat the advice with a different degree of respect?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the fractional executive, and this would be true of a fundraiser or a fractional CMO or a fractional CFO, like they're doing the work. And so I always coach my team to build meaningful fundraising plans, but to cut out the excess that doesn't make an impact, right? And so at the end of the day, the fractional fundraiser is putting into their fundraising plan that they will implement. Like they're accountable for the things in that plan. And so no one else, unless there's other members on the team who are doing things, like at the end of the day, they're doing the work. They're actually, like, I call it from strategy to stuffing envelopes. And so it gets done because you do it.
Because they're doing it.
Yeah.
But do
But
people
then,
within the organization sometimes feel like, well, yeah, but they're not here full time. They're not as committed as we are. Does that happen? Because that can happen with consultants. Does it happen?
totally. It doesn't happen the same way because also we work on 12-month plus contracts. So they're in it for a while and they really do feel like they're part of the team. That being said, I actually think sometimes the opposite happens, where you're used to having that person and they're like, let's say the ED is so used to having this fractional fundraiser and things are going so well. And so the ED is like, well, can you do this? And can you do that? And what about this? And so sometimes they're just so grateful for the extra set of hands that they pile on all the other work that maybe isn't a good strategic use of the fractional fundraiser's time. That's often where I coach the fractional fundraisers on how to manage those relationships and set those boundaries. And I've also done it and making sure that your clients really are reminded that you're the expert. So sometimes organizations will be like, well, I mean, I had a client where we were doing an appeal and, multiple emails and all that. And I was like, okay, this next email is going out. They're like, we're sending too many emails. And I just said to them, you hired us because you want our strategic oversight. And I can tell you, we need to be sending more emails. And they said, okay. So it's those kinds of dynamics that come up more than the like, you're not really one of us. That does not happen. That hasn't happened so far. And I've trained over 30 fractional fundraisers. So
wow. Although I have to tell you, when you said that about more email, I thought about the old SNL skit with "We Need More Cowbell," because I maybe
I don't know that one.
Okay, well, I'll share it with you when we're all in Toronto. But that's a constant debate about making sure that we're doing more things that work and less of things that don't. And sometimes it's difficult. So it's good to hear that if you're in there fractionally speaking, that making you 2 or 3 days or whatever the number of days it is a week on that contract doesn't inhibit the ability for the organization to respect both the work and the direction provided. So, but let me ask you this: are there things that where you've seen fractionals work particularly well, and places where, I don't mean places, roles where fractionals are less effective for either for themselves or for the organizations? Like, where does fractionality, I don't know how to use this word.
That's a great question. Yeah. So what I would say is administrative type roles can work really well with fractionals. So, or like on the operations, human resources, marketing, fundraising, like all of those types of functions, I've seen where it doesn't feel like the core mission work of the organization. Now we can talk about fundraising being mission work, I know, but I'm just saying how we traditionally think about that division. That to me is an excellent place where fractional executives can add really meaningful support to organizations. I haven't seen it done with programming work. I think it would be harder, but I'm not saying never, because I'm always open to being proven wrong. And then the other role, people often ask about executive directors. I think I've seen a lot of people very successful as interim executive directors, or if the organization is really small enough, maybe they don't have a paid executive director and they want their first paid executive director, I could see it being an option, but those roles are so intense that I think if you did the fractional route, it would be like quite a bit more expensive because they wouldn't be able to take on as many clients. And yeah, so that's kind of how I've seen things. Again, I'm not that it can't be done, I just haven't seen it done.
Well, in fact, that led me to the question I was going to ask you about differences between interims and fractionals, and especially at the executive level where we've seen this, right? All of us have. And a person is coming into an organization, leading on an interim basis, that might be a different relationship, not only to the staff, but to the board and to donors. Because is this person here with us for the long haul or not? So talk about the difference between interim and fractional.
Okay, so I'm going to call them like, there's professional interim people, and then there's like higher up interim testing someone out. I'm not going to talk about that one because that I think is different. Like when you have someone on staff and you're, promoting them into an interim role, you're really seeing if they can fill those shoes. That's a different thing. But there's the professional interns who come in, they're change agents. Really what they're doing is taking an organization through a period of transition where there is not long-term. Most interim roles I know of are 6 to 8 months. And they're there to kind of give the next person a clean slate, right? Clean things up. They're not there to win a popularity contest. Often they're making really hard decisions and like righting the ship, is that the term? Like just kind of getting things in the right direction so that whoever comes in next can really take off. And it's sort of a really good response to like the panic situation of like, oh my goodness, we don't have a succession plan and we need someone in quickly, but we're not ready. Like it's going to take us longer to really find that long-term option. So to me, that's what an interim person does. They're not necessarily working, they could be full-time, or I think a lot of interim executives right now are looking at like maybe 3-4 days a week, a little bit more flexibility, not always in person. But at the end of the day, like they're there to clean house a little bit or like get things in order. Often they're doing things like very foundational, updating bylaws, managing the HR stuff. And so it's going to be it's a completely different function. It's probably, and it should be more expensive than a fractional. You're getting way more time and it's a much harder job. And it is shorter. Like you are expecting them, in my experience and from what I've seen, you are really expecting them to make some waves.
Yeah. You know, as you were talking about that, I imagined so many crime movies where there's a fixer and they come in and clean
Yeah,
everything up. So there's an element of that, I guess, for many
yeah,
organizations that are messy,
yeah,
and you don't want to foist that on a new executive director, president, you know, CEO.
yeah,
But also it sounds like it's not necessarily a job for a fractional, even if they have that skill set, because the relationship is
yeah.
different.
Yeah, the
And
nature of the work is just much more intense and hands-on. And I look at fractionals as kind of like the slow burn,
yeah,
where you're really building the deep capacity of the organization. And so it is yeah, it's over a longer period of time. It's really a bigger bridge between not having a fundraiser to eventually being able to hire someone with more experience in-house. But it typically takes organizations longer to have that foundation more deeply seated.
and speaking of foundations, that's one of the other things I was curious about. In as you said, let's say you've got an interim situation, they come in, they clean things up, then it's better for the next person who arrives. For people who are coming in a development role, often things have been messy there too.
Yeah.
So, what, how clean does it have to be for a fractional to be successful?
Okay.
What are the things that, you know, what's your checklist before you take on a fractional assignment?
Yeah. So it differs for everyone based on their personal interests and skill sets. And what I will say is, to me, fractionals are best used in organizations where there's only one fundraising position, and probably it's been vacant. So usually it's like the executive director, some programming staff who've been piecing together the appeals, if they send
Oh,
any, writing the grants, all that kind of stuff. But they're at the cusp of like hiring, or they've had a position or they've had really high turnover in that junior fundraising job. And so typically those organizations, they're raising some money, but they actually don't have, there's not a lot to clean up because there's not a whole lot of history. Now, that's not 100% of the time. I'm working, one of our fractional fundraisers right now is trying to manage like a database that's inaccurate, right? And that requires a little bit more cleanup than I think a fractional is equipped to do. Or you just understand that other things will be put off and the progress will be slower. So they can do some cleanup, but a lot of the time, um, it's marginal in the sense that there wasn't much there to begin with. Um, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to clean it up. It just takes applying what I would consider just like good fundraising strategy.
there sounds like a little bit of Mary Poppins in this role.
I like
I mean,
that.
in that, you know, that they have to come in with a bag armed with more stuff than you can imagine. And then they come in and do all these magical things. But then when the job is done or when the contract is up and they have to move on, that must be difficult. So just now taking it off the professional dimension for a
Yeah.
minute, just the personal one, what has that
Mm,
been like for you and for colleagues who are choosing this? Because it's one thing to say, okay, I choose to work here and these are my limits. But then you come to the end of the limit and you've seen that child you've been working with as an organization grow up another year.
yeah.
Maybe you want to stick around and enjoy some of that success, but your contract's up. So how is it personally to navigate?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of contracts do extend for multiple years. I think the records right now is almost 5 years. But that being said, just because everyone's so happy with that arrangement and it's great, like the organization's doing well and everyone's happy. So there are times when organizations will outgrow the functionality of a fractional executive, like when you really do need to bring that role in-house. Um, and I mean, it's the same as leaving a job you love. I think that you, as a fundraiser, one of the biggest disappointments in my career has been seeing all of my hard work not be continued. And so I think as a fractional, you're actually in a position to help hire, onboard, and even train the person who will succeed you. And because it's always like, because it's a contract, you're always thinking about succession. And so you can be more strategic and manage it a little bit better. And so I have seen organizations just really take off after working with us because the transition has been smooth. Now, not always the case. I've seen some organizations where, they're like, oh, that went really well, and we're not going to replace you. I'm like, well, it's too big for us, and now you're not doing the work. You're not gonna raise money. So that is heartbreaking, but the relationships continue. Some of my like favorite people in the sector are past clients and past colleagues. I mean, those carry on.
I imagine it also goes the other way sometimes, right? Where you're in that fractional role, and then that love just grows, and it's time to move on from engagement to marriage, or whatever the analogy equivalent is. So you decide, and the organization decides, there's more we can do here,
Yeah.
and so you're willing to do more of it. How does that transition work?
Okay,
Is
so
it easy,
that's
hard? I mean, what, you know?
It's only happened once. So as we were moving from an agency to this network model, one of my staff members in the agency, instead of becoming a fractional fundraiser on her own, she actually took a full-time job with one of our clients. And to me, that's like such a beautiful success story because they're so happy. Like I feel like a matchmaker. So that has worked really well. If that's kind of what you're asking about, like, can you do more? Absolutely, that is possible. I mean, we're also with this network model younger. It's only been about 3 years, I think. So I haven't seen that happen very often. Honestly, like for the fundraiser, as much as you like the organization and the people, it's really hard to go back to working in-house. Most people are pretty happy consulting.
Right. And I don't know who's sitting in the room with us live right now and whether or not they are consultants or not, but for people who were always working in an office and then moved to virtual recently, that's a big experience jump. And same thing for working for an organization versus working for yourself. There are risks and rewards, but that freedom is addictive.
Yeah, it really is. And the risks with this model, like if you are a consultant or if you want to be a fractional consultant, the risks are much lower. Like our model, you only need 3 clients to be fully booked. That's in some ways less risky than working in-house because if something happens in-house, you get in a new executive director and you hate your boss or you have a toxic board, like you don't have a lot of options. But if you're a fractional executive of any type and you have 3 clients, 4 clients, and you don't like one of them, you still have 2 or 3 clients you can lean on that are going to pay the bills consistently. And it's a lot easier to let go of those clients you don't want to work with. I'm not going to call them bad, but the clients where it's not a fit. And I have seen both fractional fundraisers and other fractional executives let go of clients or fire clients because for many reasons it's not right. Yeah.
Yeah, same way that we would leave an organization. But it takes a lot of courage to make moves like this, to decide that you want to be independent or start a company or to be a fractional. All these things there's a certain amount of risk, right? I mean, one of the risks might be, well, can I get my 3 clients? But I guess if the comparison is to a consultancy where you might need to have, I don't know what the number of clients is, depends upon what you do and what you charge and how many hours, but if you might need 10 or 12 clients in a year or more versus 3 that you work with consistently, one of the parts of this might be about marketing, like what makes a successful fractional in terms of being out there and being available in order to get your 3 clients so you can make your 144,000 or whatever it is a year.
Yeah. So I teach people that like step by step in I call it the Fractional Fundraiser Academy. And I mean, it's not when we think of marketing, I think we often think of like advertising and things like that. Really, that's not where you're finding clients. It's mostly through your network, maybe a little bit of LinkedIn, but it's honestly, it's connecting one-on-one. Most people find and get fully booked with their clients within the people who are already in their network, because these are experienced fundraisers. They're not like, they know what they already have a community of people in the sector. In our program, the fastest anyone has found their first client has been within a month. The longest it's taken, and again, like 30 people, the longest it's taken has been 5 months. On average, it's about 3 months. And so it doesn't take that long. And honestly, a lot of fractional executives, when they're starting out, and I've coached other consultants, not fundraisers, on this as well. There's a couple things they can do to minimize the risk. One is they find their first client while they're still working 9 to 5. And so they don't actually have a break in income or revenue because they go from in-house, they find that first client, maybe they do a little bit of both for a couple months and then leave, or give notice when they get their second client. And also a number of people will convert their in-house job into a client. So I've seen that with at least 2 or 3 people, where they can negotiate something, and so they still have that continuity. So yeah, it's definitely way less risky.
I just want to point out, because someone asked in the chat if there would be a recording of this, and there is. We are making one. But if you have questions or any comments, that'll be a part of this conversation as well. So feel free to list those in either the chat or the Q&A. But and before we go too much further, Cindy, again, there are a lot of people who are not going to be flying to Toronto. So how can people learn more about you and your work and connect with you, whether for this or just because you're a great person working in this field and they'd love to know you? What's the best way to do that in the future?
Yeah, so find me on LinkedIn. Cindy Wagman is where I am on social. I have 2 websites. One is fractionalfundraising.co. And if you're a small organization looking for a fractional fundraiser, we have a whole directory of our network, who is available to work with small organizations. Or you can fill out an intake form and I will match you. I'm like a little matchmaker. If you want to become a fractional fundraiser with our model, fractionalfundraising.co/waitlist, we launch our academy once a year with like a small little launch as well in the fall. So 1.5 times, I call it, the doors are open. And we're actually we're like in launch mode right now. So you can join the wait list. I have an open house on April 24th, and then enrollment ends April 29th. So yeah, we're like in the thick of it.
Well, and I want to thank you for putting that earworm of Fiddler on the Roof in my ear now that you say matchmaker. I don't know. Yeah. I'm going to have that burning through my mind for the rest of the day. One of the questions that I know that anybody who's thinking about not just what you do at the firm, not just this work in particular, but leaving employment, whether by their choice or because they were laid off, that happens to a lot of people in the sector, is how am I going to get access to some of the things I need in order to live? I was making light of the fact that in Canada, there's a little more, what would seem here to be some equitable treatment for example, if you have a child, things we are not accustomed to necessarily here. So one of the questions might be about accessing healthcare. So if one decides to become a consultant or a fractional, working with you or working independently, whatever, what are some of the things on their own personal checklist? If you were doing this the first time and cindywagman.com didn't exist, what would be the things that you'd be looking for to ensure that you'd be okay if you left your current employment?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm like a numbers person. I find security in numbers. I actually have, you can go to fractionalfundraising.co/budget. I have a budget template you can fill out and literally crunch the numbers, because I know whether or not you join our program or just figure it out on your own, it's like your business, it's a business cash flow budget. So you can see how much you would take home every month and how many clients you would need and what you need to charge and all that kind of stuff. And it's a Google Sheet, so you can actually like put in your own numbers. There's numbers there, but you can change them or adjust them. So if you are like me, where you find comfort in the numbers, I would like, that's how I make decisions. I look at scenario planning with my budget, but not everyone needs to do that, or some people get overwhelmed by numbers. So the basic things that you're going to need to feel security, like I would start by looking, okay, you just need like one long-term contract that's going to pay you enough to live. You definitely in the US need to figure out things like healthcare. Also, if you're fundraising, if you're a different fractional executive, I don't think this applies, but if you're a fundraiser, different states have different legislations around registering as a consultant or as a solicitor. I don't know.
Yeah,
Every
those
state
are
is
two
different.
different
Yeah.
things, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So that's something to figure out, but at the bare minimum to like run a business, you don't need a whole lot. You need separate bank accounts and a separate credit card. You need to register your business, even if you're a sole proprietor, or is it, it's not an LLC. Anyway,
Well,
it's
you
just,
can
yeah,
certainly set up as an LLC.
you can set up as
It
an
could have
LLC,
tax
yeah.
advantages. I'm using the word could because I'm not an attorney or an
Yeah.
accountant. But these are
Yeah,
things that people can investigate
yeah, yeah.
in order to ensure that they're protected. But it sounds like your checklist does have some things in there that sometimes we wouldn't think about. Like, do we have that healthcare every month?
Yeah,
And do we have,
yeah.
you know, enough for the grocery bill and for our
And
rent
insurance.
and
Insurance is
insurance?
yeah. There's a couple resources in terms of registering your business. In the States, I think it's called doula, DOOLA. In Canada, there's one called Owner, OWNR, I think is how they spell it. It's like one of those tech companies that removes vowels sometimes. But those allow you to register your business really quickly and for very little money. So register your business. Insurance, you definitely want some basic insurances. I've never had to use my business insurance, but I've always had it. And then healthcare or other benefits like disability insurance and critical illness are the ones that I think are, that's kind of like next step, but that provides you a little bit of security. So
Yeah. You've thought through this, and as you say, you're a numbers person, so you wanted to have the comfort of knowing how you're doing against those numbers, right? That's what a profit
yeah,
statement would be, a
yeah,
projection. Then we figure out, well, how we're doing, and we make adjustments, and then we just feel good.
exactly.
And that's great. What's the thing that surprised you the most about this?
Ooh, the demand on, I mean, that was what necessitated this shift in our structure from an agency to a network, is because I really couldn't imagine how to meet the demand. So when I started, it was just me and I had an intern. Then when in 2020, we were a team of 6, including myself, and that was all in-house. Now we have a network of, there's 25 active members in our network, and I've trained 30 people, and people are booked. And like, I have some people who are building their own agencies because the demand is, one of my members of the network, Morgan, messaged me today. She's like, I'm onboarding my 5th client, and she's hiring her own team now to help her. So the demand, I knew it was there because I knew it was a good idea, but I think that this model of fractional executives is going to take off in the sector even more than it has already, because everyone is resource strapped, and this allows you to get so much more bang for your buck.
So this is the thing that puzzles me about this in the end, is that the demand is clearly there. It's strong. And as you say, even if this model didn't exist, the demand would be there within the organizations for people who can do the work that we either don't think we have the resources to do, or we can't find the person to do it, or both. What is it about this sector that we're always scrambling when
I
we have a
mean,
lot of talent? And because you just assembled in a very short amount of time a team of people
yeah,
who can service fractionals very effectively for organizations, and all of that's wonderful. What is it about this sector that we continue to have these needs?
Yeah. So there's a lot. I mean, I think the person who says it best is Dan Pallotta in the movie Uncharitable. We we have a mentality, and I know a lot of people will blame donors. Donors don't want to fund overhead and all that kind of stuff, but we perpetuate it just as much. And there is a sense that because we do good work, that we should be martyrs, and we should, and then that scarcity, I think, like, scarcity creates scarcity. So when you operate from a place of scarcity, you treat other people, it's like you pay it forward, and it's really harmful. So I think part of the problem is we don't treat our people well. We don't like fundraising. Wrote a whole book for reluctant fundraisers because people think it's icky, and instead of seeing it for what it is, which is a way to resource really important work. And we perpetuate a lot of really harmful beliefs. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I think Dan Pallotta does a great job talking about this. Also, there's a lot there. And how we treat people, I think, is the crux of it in terms of why our sector, I mean, there's a crisis in terms of human capacity or human resource capacity to do the work that we are called to do and that our world needs very desperately.
Right. Thank you for all those, Cindy. Really appreciate it. And I know we shared where people could find you before, and Jack has also put it in the chat. So thank you for that, Jack. But I also just want to do another shout out that you'll be up there in Toronto. So for those lucky enough to go and visit that great city, then they'll also be able to visit with you, which is one of the big pluses. So hopefully they will. Thank you.
Come visit, get a cupcake.
Yeah. Yes, he won't be sending those out. So you can probably find her book and you can find her, but you're not going to find those cupcakes unless you're traveling. So hopefully we'll see you up there, folks, as you enjoyed that conference. And if not, again, we're going to be here next week with a couple of sessions, including one on Thursday, to have a discussion about what occurred there. And Cindy, if you want, come back and join us. We'd love that. But I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks, Cindy, of course, for sharing once again in very, very helpful ways about the way that she's addressing this with her colleagues. And we'll look forward to seeing you all next time. Until then, take care, and please fill out the survey so we know what you want to see in here. Until then, take care.